Belem is a very interesting city. It's a very large city. There are some millions of people that live there. I'm not sure how many people live there, but it's a big city. And it's a very sprawled out city. It's a big urban sprawl. And I guess some of the interesting facts about it is there are lots of skyscrapers in this city. And so as you're coming in on the plane, you're probably going to go through Sao Paulo. And Sao Paulo is amazing to see. That is just skyscrapers as far as the eye can see, just a gigantic city. And then you think that the rest of Brazil is going to be kind of small because we always hear that Sao Paulo is the third biggest city in the world. You go up to Belém, it is big. It is a very big city. I remember thinking that coming in. The airport itself is not very big, but yeah, you come out, it's just this giant city, and it's pretty daunting at first. And then you see just how the city's divided up amongst the missionaries, that all of the different stakes are basically just the different boroughs of Belém. But yeah, you have your rich portion of the city, which that's where the mission president lives, where the mission office is. That part's called Nazaré, which is funny because that's Portuguese for Nazareth. And the city itself, Belém, that translates to Bethlehem. And then my first area was Canaan, which translates to Canaan. So there are lots of biblical names. And so I remember laughing about that with the missionaries. I'm like, yeah, I got called to the Bethlehem mission and reported to the office in Nazareth. And then I got called to Canaan as my first area. So you have to understand that there's this big culture, and Belém is a very interesting culture about it. That as far as culture goes, it really revolves around religion. Not just Catholicism. But interestingly enough, there's a church, I think it's the Assembly of God, is how it translates to in English. The Assembly of God is huge in Belém. Huge! That's basically where it started for Brazil. That it showed up in Belém and then fanned out across Brazil. You have that church, I think in Portuguese, the Quadrangular Church, is very prominent there. So you have the Assembly of God, them, Quadrangular, you have Jehovah's Witnesses, of course, they're very big. They're in Belém. You have the Catholics, of course. And you have the Adventists. You have really every church. And there's a very large biblical culture there. And it's interesting because in the United States, there are lots of churches, of course. We're very religious. But in the streets, you don't see it as much. People don't go around just talking about God and talking about the Bible in America. But in Brazil, they do. It's interesting. There are a bunch of different sayings down in Brazil. Like one of them is graças a Deus, thanks to God. And people say that at the end of everything. If you're just talking to people and you ask someone, how's your day? It's well, graças a Deus. People talk about that all the time. So there's this big culture around God. And so the people are very religious in Belém, which is something I admired. But yeah, another thing that's interesting is transportation in Brazil, in Belém, because it's a hot mess there in Belém. It's crazy. There are just a few big freeways, and these freeways are just kind of crazy. I don't know if you've ever seen Mad Max or anything like that, but it kind of reminds me of that sometimes. There's just this crazy road rage going on where people don't always obey the traffic laws. But strangely enough, accidents never happen. I never saw very many accidents while I was down there, at least not very many serious ones, but yet people are reckless as they drive, but they just don't hit each other. So I'm like, that's impressive in my opinion. But the morning rush as you go into Belém, that's something to behold, seriously. Because a lot of people, work in the center of Belém, but they live on the outskirts of Belém, so everyone relies on buses and such. These buses get loaded with people. We don't know what it's like in America because we don't allow people to do the following. I remember one time when I was on a bus, and I look at, and there are just people all around me, and just like, right in my face. It's kind of like riding a train in Japan or something like that. There's just people don't understand personal space. But I remember looking out the window. I'm a tall guy, so I could at least see over everybody and look out the window. And I saw another bus where there was an older guy on the outside of the bus, but hanging on to the inside of the windows of the bus. And so as they're driving, I just saw this guy hanging on outside of the bus, riding alongside. And, every once in a while he'd kind of get a little bit tired and you'd see people stick their arms out and like hang on to him to make sure he doesn't fall into traffic and die. But there was a guy riding on the side of the bus as we were going to Belem in the morning. I was just like, this is ridiculous. But that's how loaded buses can get. And so transportation is crazy in Belem.